The Princess of Wales has made a rare public appearance going to church with some of the other royals.
When Kate Middleton decided to attend this church in Scotland, yet no one could have foreseen what would unfold. It was a moment so touching that it left her and the entire congregation in chills. On the morning of August 25, 2024, the Scottish Highlands were calm under the typical grey sky. Among the rugged hills and valleys stood the Kirk, a centuries-old stone church that served as both a place of worship and a symbol of community for the surrounding villages. The church's stone walls and simple steeple had withstood the tests of time, and inside, the wooden pews, worn with years of use, provided comfort to the regular parishioners who gathered there every Sunday. The congregation had already begun to trickle in for the usual Sunday service, some chatting quietly, others heading straight to their seats. The elderly Father McGregor, the church's pastor, greeted each parishioner with a warm, if not always energetic, smile. He knew everyone by name and had performed countless baptisms, weddings, and funerals in this place. Today, however, there was an unusual undercurrent of excitement. Word had spread that Kate Middleton, the Duchess of Cambridge, might be attending. Kate had been absent from the public eye for some time due to her cancer diagnosis, making any public appearance by her all the more significant. The news had not been officially confirmed, but the possibility of her presence had caused an almost palpable buzz. As the service time drew closer, more and more unfamiliar faces filled the pews, and a few reporters, staying discreet at the back, began to murmur among themselves. It wasn't often that a royal visit was expected in such a small, quiet church. So what changes will her presence make? The murmur of the crowd fell to silence as a sleek black car pulled into the churchyard. The door opened and out stepped Kate, accompanied by King Charles.
And this is the thing, is that every family is different. Yeah. And the pressures that we all face are different.
Their arrival was quiet, almost understated, but it was impossible to ignore. Kate was dressed in a simple dark coat that contrasted with the usual bright, festive attire of royal appearances. Her face, pale and weary from her illness, remained composed. There was a softness to her step, a slight vulnerability that no one in the crowd missed. Despite the attention, Kate's presence seemed to be more of a quiet act of faith than a royal duty. As she walked towards the church, she nodded briefly to the small crowd gathered outside, acknowledging their presence, but did not linger. Her demeanor suggested that, though she was aware of the people around her, she sought only the solace of the church itself. Inside, the atmosphere was reverent as the service began, its familiar cadence providing a sense of stability to all who gathered. The sound of the church bell ringing, the soft strains of the organ, and the hymns sung in unison were grounding. Kate and King Charles sat near the front, as expected, but they seemed just as much a part of the community as anyone else. Their royal status faded into the background of this intimate, centuries-old service. Kate kept her gaze lowered for much of the service, her face composed, but reflecting a weariness that she couldn't hide. Father McGregor, the pastor, opened the service with a short prayer and then moved into the sermon. Today's message, as always, was one of faith and perseverance, but the words seemed particularly resonant with the congregation. Father McGregor spoke about the challenges people face in life, the unseen burdens that everyone carries, and the strength found in faith. His message was simple and direct, but it seemed to carry more weight today. It was clear that many in the congregation, those familiar with Kate's situation and those simply moved by her presence, were listening with a deeper sense of empathy. Kate sat quietly during the sermon, her hands clasped tightly together, perhaps seeking comfort in the familiar rhythm of worship. King Charles, seated beside her, was similarly absorbed in the service, though his presence provided an almost imperceptible layer of support to his daughter-in-law. His own struggles with health were not publicized in the same way as Kate's, but there was an understanding between them, a shared knowledge of hardship and the quiet resilience it required. The service continued as it always did, but there was something unspoken in the air. Parishioners stole glances at Kate, not out of curiosity, but from a sense of respect. Some wondered about her health. Was she feeling better than the photos had suggested? Others were simply moved by her bravery in choosing to attend church, despite everything she had been through. It wasn't an act of defiance, but rather one of quiet solidarity. Kate wasn't there to be seen. She was there because it was where she found peace. The hymns, too, felt different today. As the choir sang, their voices filled the space in a way that was comforting, almost communal. Kate joined in, her voice blending softly with the rest. It was a simple act, but it was a moment of connection that felt profound. She wasn't standing out. She was blending in, just another member of the congregation. As the sermon drew to a close, there was an unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. People were no longer focused on Kate, the Duchess, or the spectacle of her presence. Instead, they were united in the shared experience of worship, of being present in this small church together. And as the final hymn began, everyone stood and sang. The lyrics, simple and hopeful, echoed off the stone walls, filling the space with a sense of unity that went beyond individual circumstances. Kate, still standing beside King Charles, sang quietly but with conviction. It was not an expression of royal grace, but one of raw humanity, an acknowledgement of her vulnerability and strength. The congregation followed suit, their voices coming together, forming a sound that transcended the boundaries of status or rank. In that moment, there was no duchess or king, just a group of people bound by the same rhythms of faith. What happened next would leave everyone in the Kirk, locals, visitors, and even the royal family themselves, profoundly changed. As the final hymn's final note faded into silence, the congregation at the Kirk seemed to exhale in unison. It was a comforting conclusion to a service that had already stirred many hearts. Yet, as Father McGregor prepared to deliver the closing blessing, an unexpected shift occurred. From her seat near the front, Kate Middleton stirred, her movements catching the attention of those nearby. Her hands smoothed the folds of her coat as she rose slowly to her feet. The soft rustling sound was enough to ripple curiosity through the room, murmurs whispering through the congregation like a breeze. No one had anticipated her speaking, least of all Kate herself. Her aides had gently advised against it, concerned for her health and the strain it might cause. But as she sat among the community, enveloped by a warmth she hadn't felt in months, an undeniable pull drew her forward. This wasn't a gesture for the cameras or a nod to royal tradition. It was something deeply personal. The church fell silent as Kate stepped toward the simple lectern at the front of the room. Her movements were steady, but her resolve radiated a quiet strength that drew the congregation's focus. Her hands rested lightly on the polished wood, her fingers tracing its edges for reassurance. She took a breath and began, her voice calm but tinged with emotion. "I hadn't planned to speak today," she said, her words carrying a weight that immediately stilled every whisper. "But being here among you, surrounded by faith and kindness, I feel compelled to share a few words." The congregation leaned in, their curiosity shifting to rapt attention. This wasn't the poised duchess they had seen at public engagements. This was a woman standing before them, unguarded and raw. "For months now," she continued, "I have walked a path I never imagined. My diagnosis earlier this year was a shock, not just to me but to my family and those I hold dear. It's been a journey of uncertainty, fear, and reflection, a journey that has taught me more about resilience and hope than I ever thought possible." Her voice, though steady, carried the tremor of someone speaking their truth. Heads bowed, hands clasped tightly, and tears welled in the eyes of many in the room. It wasn't just her words, but the vulnerability behind them that pierced through. "Being here today," Kate said, her gaze moving across the faces of the congregation, "is not just an act of faith but an act of gratitude. Your prayers, your letters, your kindness, they've lifted me when I felt I couldn't take another step. It's in moments like these that I've come to understand the true meaning of community." A hush fell over the room, heavier than before. Kate paused, her fingers gripping the lectern as though drawing strength from the moment. Her composure, though remarkable, seemed to crack just slightly as she continued. "I want to speak to those of you who may also be struggling. whether with illness, loss, or burdens that feel too heavy to bear," she said. Her voice softened but grew more resolute. "I've learned something through this journey that I hope might bring you comfort. Faith isn't about always being strong. Sometimes it's about admitting we're weak, that we're afraid, and allowing something greater than ourselves to carry us through." The words seemed to linger in the air, wrapping themselves around each person in the room. Some exchanged tearful glances, while others simply closed their eyes, letting her message sink in. As she spoke, her gaze occasionally shifted to King Charles, seated just a few feet away. His face, etched with pride and quiet understanding, reflected his own battles with health challenges. Their shared glances told a story of resilience forged in adversity, a bond strengthened by mutual pain and unwavering love. "I've found hope," Kate said, her voice softening, "in the most unexpected places, in the laughter of my children, in the unwavering support of my husband and family, and in the kindness of strangers."
To enjoy the break with their 3 children who are obviously out of school at the moment.
It's this hope that reminds me, even in our darkest days, there's always light to guide us forward. Her words were simple, yet their impact was profound. She wasn't speaking as a duchess or a public figure, but as a human being, a wife, a mother, and a woman who had faced her darkest fears and found the strength to rise above them. The room was silent, save for the soft rustle of tissues and the occasional sniffle. Her presence, her raw honesty, created a shared moment of vulnerability and connection. Kate's voice softened further as she concluded. "Thank you," she said, her gaze sweeping over the room. "Thank you for your prayers, for your strength, and for this moment. It's one I will carry with me, always."
I wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you personally for all the wonderful messages of support and for your understanding.
As she stepped back from the lectern, her expression calm, but her eyes glistening with unshed tears, the room remained still, as though collectively holding its breath. Then, softly, the silence broke into a ripple of applause. The sound was gentle, reverent, a rare but heartfelt response in such a sacred space. As Kate returned to her seat, she exchanged a quiet glance with King Charles, who reached out and gently squeezed her hand. It was a silent exchange of pride, love, and understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the battles they had faced and the strength they had found in one another. The service concluded shortly after, but the atmosphere in the church remained electric. Conversations buzzed softly among the congregation, each person reflecting on what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just the presence of royalty that made the moment significant. It was the reminder of the strength found in vulnerability, the hope found in community, and the light found in faith. As the congregation sat in a reflective hush following Kate's address, Father McGregor prepared to close the service. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages of his prayer book, visibly moved by the moment. The air in the kirk was dense with emotion, every person present aware that they had witnessed something deeply profound. But just as Father McGregor lifted his head to begin the final blessing, he belatedly realized that there was more. A voice rose from the back of the church. Soft and tremulous, the melody was unmistakable, the opening line of an old Scottish hymn that spoke of hope in the face of trials. The singer was a young girl, no older than 12, her voice carrying the weight of a timeless message. The congregation turned, startled but enchanted by the purity of her voice. It wasn't planned, but it felt as if the hymn had been waiting for this moment. Slowly, others joined in, first a few voices, hesitant and uncertain, and then more, until the entire church was filled with a harmonious chorus. Kate, seated at the front beside King Charles, bowed her head, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her composure wavered for a moment as the weight of the hymn seemed to press upon her. She inhaled deeply, her gaze fixed on the altar ahead. The hymn carried on, swelling in volume and emotion, its notes reverberating against the ancient stone walls of the church. It was as though the building itself was alive, holding the collective strength and vulnerability of the congregation. People sang with their eyes closed, tears streaming freely, their voices merging into one. For a few moments, time seemed to stand still. The church, the people, the hymn, it all felt suspended in an otherworldly stillness, as though the weight of the world had lifted and something divine had descended upon them. Kate glanced at Charles, who was watching the scene unfold with a quiet intensity. There was a depth in his gaze that spoke of his own struggles, his own battles fought in silence.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
He reached for Kate's hand and gave it a reassuring squeeze. It was a simple gesture, but it carried an unspoken message. We're still here, still standing. When the hymn finally came to an end, the silence that followed was almost as powerful. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint rustle of the wind outside and the soft creak of the old wooden pews. Father McGregor, visibly moved, stepped forward again. Faith is not just in the grand moments, but in the simple ones like this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Today, we have witnessed the power of unity, of hope, and of unwavering strength. With that, he delivered the final blessing, his words echoing through the silent church. As he spoke, Kate and Charles rose, their movements deliberate and dignified. The congregation followed suit, rising to their feet as the service officially came to a close. But the day was not yet over. As Kate and Charles made their way down the aisle toward the exit, the congregation instinctively stepped back, creating a path for them. There was no fanfare, no applause, only a profound silence that spoke volumes. Outside, the Scottish countryside was bathed in the soft golden glow of late afternoon. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of heather and pine. As Kate emerged from the church, the waiting crowd, who hadn't been able to fit inside, erupted into a mix of cheers and sobs. Reporters waited at the edge of the churchyard, their cameras poised but unobtrusive. They captured moments discreetly, mindful of the atmosphere. Kate and Charles emerged, their expressions calm and composed. The crowd parted to allow them through, respecting their space. Kate paused at the top of the stone steps, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. They weren't just strangers. They were people who had prayed for her, rooted for her, and shared in her journey from afar. She smiled softly, lifting a hand in a gesture of gratitude. Then something remarkable happened. A little boy, no older than 7, stepped forward from the crowd. His face was pale, his frame thin, and in his hands he held a small bouquet of wildflowers. With a shy but determined look, he walked up the steps and stopped in front of Kate. "Thank you for being brave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd held its breath as Kate knelt down to his level, her expression softening. She took the flowers from his hands and held them close, her voice trembling as she replied, "Thank you for your kindness. It means more than you know." The boy's courage seemed to open the floodgates. Others in the crowd stepped forward, sharing their own tokens of support. Letters, small gifts, even simple words of encouragement. It was a scene of spontaneous generosity, a testament to the bond between the royal family and the people. For Kate and Charles, it was overwhelming. Their roles often required them to maintain a certain distance, to be symbols rather than individuals. But here, in the shadow of the Kirk, that barrier dissolved. They weren't just royalty, they were human beings, vulnerable yet resilient, standing side by side with those who supported them. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the countryside, Kate and Charles finally departed. Their car wound its way down the narrow road, disappearing into the hills. But the impact of their visit lingered. The congregation and the crowd outside remained for a long while, talking quietly among themselves, reflecting on what they had witnessed. It wasn't just a church service. It was a moment of profound connection, a reminder of the strength that comes from faith and community. For Kate, the day marked a turning point. It wasn't just about reclaiming her public role. It was about finding herself again, rediscovering the strength that had carried her through the darkest days.
We've seen so many challenges, we've lost our loved ones, we've seen our frontline workers under immense pressure.
After Kate Middleton's visit to the Kirk in the Scottish Highlands, several members of the congregation shared their thoughts on the remarkable experience. Many were moved not just by her presence, but by the humility and grace she displayed during the service. One longtime parishioner, Mrs. Margaret Fraser, spoke about the impact of seeing the Duchess in person. It was a moment of absolute reverence to have someone like Kate Middleton here, in such a humble space. It felt so personal. She didn't act like a royal. She was just a woman, like any of us, looking for peace and solace. Mrs. Fraser went on to mention how she noticed the quiet strength in Kate's demeanor, something that resonated deeply with her own struggles. John MacDonald, another local parishioner, had come to the service with no expectation of a royal visit but left feeling inspired. When I saw Kate sitting there, beside King Charles, it was clear she wasn't there for show. She looked vulnerable but also strong. It reminded me that no matter who we are, we all need faith and support. He also commented on the sense of unity that filled the church, noting that it felt as if the entire congregation was united in their prayers for Kate's health and well-being. A visitor from Edinburgh, who had traveled specifically to see Kate, said, "Her presence was a gift to us all. She showed such courage by attending, especially considering everything she's been through. It wasn't about royalty, it was about showing up just like any of us would to seek comfort." Her words echoed a sentiment that seemed to resonate with everyone present. Kate Middleton had shared more than just her physical presence. She had shared her humanity.
My name is
Okay.
Among the many voices that shared their reflections on Kate Middleton's visit, one stood out, a young woman named Emily Walker, a local resident who had been facing her own battles. Emily, who had been struggling with mental health issues, spoke with unexpected clarity and emotion after the service. "I didn't expect to feel anything like this," Emily began, her voice slightly shaky but filled with gratitude. "I've been lost for a long time, caught in my own head, but seeing Kate today, it gave me something I didn't know I needed: hope." Emily explained that for her, Kate's presence in the church was more than just an event. It was a reminder of the resilience that people, even those in the public eye, can find in their darkest moments. When I saw her sitting there, looking so peaceful, despite everything she's been through, it made me realize I don't have to be defined by my struggles. I've been going through a hard time, but seeing her, just sitting there like she's part of us, it reminded me that I can keep going. I can keep trying. She went on to express how Kate's calm and unassuming demeanor spoke to her in a way that words never could. It wasn't about her being royalty. It was about her showing up, just like anyone else, to seek comfort. It made me feel like maybe I'm not so alone, that maybe there's a way out of all the dark thoughts in my head. Emily wasn't the only one affected by the Duchess's visit, but her words highlighted how, sometimes, a simple act of attending a church service in solidarity with others can offer the most profound moments of healing and hope. Kate Middleton's visit to the Kirk in the Scottish Highlands on that quiet August morning had a deep impact on everyone there. Her presence, despite her illness, showed strength and grace, and she quietly connected with the congregation. For people like Emily, a young woman struggling with her own issues, Kate's courage gave them hope and reminded them they weren't alone. What started as just another Sunday service turned into a meaningful moment of shared strength and faith, leaving everyone feeling inspired and united. What are your thoughts about Kate Middleton's attendance in church, despite her health challenges?
It has been an incredibly tough couple of months for our entire family, but I've had a fantastic medical team.
Please share your thoughts with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed watching the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the next video on your screen. You will enjoy it.